When 8-year-old Ethan crashes his father's wedding with shocking evidence on the bride's phone, he doesn't just stop the ceremony. He exposes a criminal who's been targeting grieving families for years. It was supposed to be the perfect day for Michael Bennett. After 3 years of being a single father to his son Ethan following his wife's passing, he had finally found love again with the charming and beautiful Rebecca Wilson. Everyone was happy for them. Everyone except 8-year-old Ethan. Michael stood at the altar, nervously adjusting his tie. His best man, his brother James, gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Relax, man. You deserve this happiness," James whispered. The church was beautifully decorated with white lilies and blue hydrangeas, Rebecca's favorite flowers. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the polished wooden floors. In the front row sat Michael's parents, beaming with pride. Next to them was an empty seat where Ethan was supposed to be. The boy had been unusually quiet all morning, barely speaking during breakfast and disappearing shortly after they arrived at the church. Michael had assumed he was with his grandmother, but now he couldn't help but worry. "Has anyone seen Ethan?" Michael whispered to James, who shook his head. Just then, the wedding march began to play, and all heads turned to watch Rebecca glide down the aisle in her elegant white dress. She looked radiant, her smile dazzling as she approached Michael. For a moment, he forgot his concerns about his son. As the ceremony progressed, the priest had just reached the pivotal moment. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air for a moment of silence. Suddenly, the church doors burst open with a loud bang. Everyone turned to see Ethan standing there, his small frame silhouetted against the bright daylight outside. His face was flushed, his blue suit rumpled, and he was clutching something in his hand. "Stop!" Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the stunned church. "Dad, you can't marry her. She's a liar." The guests gasped collectively as Ethan ran down the aisle toward his father. Michael was mortified. He stepped away from Rebecca and knelt down to Ethan's level. "Ethan, what are you doing? We talked about this. I know you miss Mom, but—" "It's not about Mom," Ethan interrupted, tears streaming down his face. "It's about what she did, what she's still doing." He thrust his hand forward, revealing Rebecca's cell phone. "I found this in her purse when she asked me to get her lipstick. She's been stealing money from you, Dad." Rebecca's face turned pale. She reached for the phone. "Ethan, honey, you're confused. Give that back to me right now." Michael gently took the phone from Ethan's hand, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What are you talking about, buddy?" he asked, looking from his son to his fiancée. "Check her texts with someone named Marcus. They're planning something bad," Ethan insisted, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "She's not who you think she is, Dad." With trembling fingers, Michael opened the text messages as the church remained in stunned silence. The blood drained from his face as he scrolled through message after message. Conversations about accessing his accounts, plans to transfer funds offshore, and discussions about how Rebecca would leave once they were married, and she had legal access to his assets. "What is this, Rebecca?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who's Marcus? And why are you discussing my financial information with him?" Rebecca's demeanor changed instantly. Her sweet smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said flatly. "That nosy kid of yours has ruined everything." She glanced toward the exit, calculating her options. "It's worse than that, Dad," Ethan continued. "Show them the pictures in her hidden folder. She's been taking photos of all your financial documents and passwords." The church erupted into murmurs as Michael navigated to the photo gallery on Rebecca's phone. Sure enough, there were hundreds of pictures, bank statements, investment portfolios, his safe combination, and even photographs of his personal identification documents. "Rebecca," Michael said, his voice hardening as the truth sank in. "What is this? Who are you really? Rebecca's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. She took a step back. You don't understand. It's complicated. James stepped forward protectively, placing himself between Rebecca and the exit. I think you should explain yourself right now. I don't owe any of you an explanation. Rebecca snapped, her former sweet persona completely gone. She reached for her purse, which sat on a nearby pew. Just let me leave, and we can forget this ever happened. Michael's father stood up. I'm calling the police, he announced, pulling out his phone. No need, said a voice from the back of the church. A woman in a simple dress stood up from one of the back pews. Detective Sarah Martinez, Financial Crimes Division. We've been tracking Ms. Wilson, or should I say, Ms. Blackwood, for quite some time. She's wanted in 3 states for marriage fraud and identity theft. Detective Sarah Martinez moved with practiced confidence down the church aisle, her eyes never leaving Rebecca. The detective's simple floral dress had been the perfect disguise, just another wedding guest, unremarkable and forgettable in the crowd. But now, as she revealed her badge, the transformation was striking. Her posture straightened, her gaze sharpened, and the church fell into a deeper hush as the full weight of authority filled the space. Rebecca Blackwood, Detective Martinez announced, her voice carrying through the now silent church. We've been tracking your activities across 3 states for the past 18 months. She turned slightly to address the confused audience while keeping Rebecca in her peripheral vision. Ms. Blackwood is a professional con artist who specifically targets widowers with children. This would have been her 4th successful operation in 3 years. Rebecca's transformation was equally dramatic, but in the opposite direction. The woman who moments ago had been the picture of bridal radiance now seemed to physically shrink before everyone's eyes. Her carefully crafted mask of warmth and vulnerability had fallen away completely, replaced by something cold and calculating. Her eyes darted frantically between the detective, the exits, and finally landed on Ethan with pure hatred. You have no proof of anything, Rebecca hissed, her fingers tightening around her small beaded clutch. This is ridiculous. Michael, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. She reached toward him, but Michael stepped back, pulling Ethan protectively to his side. Michael stared at the woman he had been prepared to spend his life with, trying to reconcile the Rebecca he thought he knew with the stranger standing before him now. I don't even know who you are, he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Detective Martinez nodded to her colleagues positioned strategically around the church. We have more than enough evidence. Ms. Blackwood, your digital fingerprints are all over this operation, just like the others. The only difference this time is that you were stopped before completing the con. The congregation sat in stunned silence as the detective continued explaining the elaborate scheme. Rebecca Blackwood, who has also used the names Rebecca Wells, Jessica Montgomery, and Elizabeth Carter, has perfected a technique we refer to as the widow's web. She researches potential targets thoroughly, learning everything about their deceased partners, their financial status, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. Michael felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. Every memory of his relationship with Rebecca was being rewritten in real time. How did you find her? He asked the detective, his voice hollow. Actually, we weren't tracking her directly to you, Detective Martinez explained. We had been building a case based on her previous victims, following her digital trail. One of her former targets recognized her photograph in your engagement announcement in the local paper. He contacted us immediately. Rebecca's face contorted with rage as she realized the magnitude of her failure. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at Ethan. That little brat ruined everything. I had it all planned so perfectly. Just 3 more days and half of everything would have been legally mine. She turned her venomous gaze to Michael. And you were so pathetically easy to manipulate. Oh, Rebecca, you're so understanding. Oh, Rebecca, you're so good with Ethan. You practically begged me to take your money. Ethan pressed closer to his father's side, but his young face showed determination rather than fear. "I knew something was wrong when you started being mean to me when Dad wasn't around," he said clearly, his voice carrying in the hushed church. "You told me I was going to boarding school after the wedding, that Dad and you had already decided." Michael looked down at his son in shock. "What? I would never." "Of course not," Rebecca sneered. "But you would have agreed eventually. I would have made sure of it. That's what I do. I make men like you agree to things. It's remarkably easy when you know which buttons to push." Detective Martinez stepped between Rebecca and the Bennett family. "That's enough, Ms. Blackwood." She turned to Michael with professional compassion. "Mr. Bennett, Rebecca's method is to gradually isolate her targets from their children and other family members. The boarding school threat is a common tactic. It creates uncertainty and fear in the child while giving her exclusive access to control the family finances." James, Michael's best man and brother, moved forward protectively. "You've been in our lives for over a year," he said incredulously. "You came to our family holidays. You helped organize Dad's 80th birthday party. Was all of that just research?" Rebecca's laugh was cold and entirely unfamiliar. Nothing like the warm, musical sound Michael had grown to love. Of course it was research. Every conversation was gathering intelligence. Every family dinner was mapping relationships and vulnerabilities. "You think I enjoyed listening to your father's boring war stories or your mother's endless gardening advice? I was working." The older Mr. and Mrs. Bennett sat stunned in the front pew, their expressions a mixture of hurt and outrage. Michael's mother reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it tightly as the full realization of their family's narrow escape dawned on them. "How many others?" Michael asked quietly, almost to himself. Detective Martinez answered anyway. "We've confirmed 3 completed operations. Martin Edwards in Seattle lost nearly $2 million before she disappeared 6 months into their marriage. Thomas Wilson in Portland lost his home and his business. And Peter Hamilton in San Francisco nearly lost custody of his children when Rebecca, then calling herself Elizabeth, filed fabricated abuse allegations as leverage during their divorce." The revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. He sank into the nearest pew, suddenly unable to stand. Ethan remained by his side, his small hand still clutching his father's. The church that had moments ago been filled with anticipation of a joyful union now felt suffocating with betrayal. All 3 men had lost their wives to illness. The detective continued gently. All had children. All were financially stable with significant assets. And all were approached by Rebecca during vulnerable periods of grief, typically at support groups, charity functions, or, in your case, Mr. Bennett, a memorial fundraiser. The annual charity fundraiser for cancer research. That's where Michael had first met Rebecca, exactly 2 years after Sarah's death. He had been a featured speaker, sharing his late wife's battle with the disease. Rebecca had approached him afterward, her eyes filled with tears, speaking of her own mother's similar struggle. It had seemed like fate, a connection born of shared pain and understanding. It had all been a calculated lie. One of the other officers approached with Rebecca's purse, which had been secured as evidence. "Detective, you need to see this," he said quietly, handing her an envelope. Detective Martinez examined the contents, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal genuine concern. "Mr. Bennett, did you give Ms. Blackwood access to your safe deposit box?" Michael blinked in confusion. "No, those are held in a family trust. My father and I are the only signatories." "Not anymore," the detective replied, showing him the documents. "These are transfer authorizations with your signature, or what appears to be your signature, giving Rebecca access to all accounts effective upon your marriage." "That's impossible," Michael protested, examining the papers. "I never signed these." Then understanding dawned. "The practice signatures for the marriage certificate. You said it was tradition to practice signing our new names together." Rebecca's smirk confirmed his suspicions. "You practiced your signature 27 times on sample paper. I only needed one good one to create the transfers. The others were just to mask my true intention. You're so sentimental, Michael, so eager to believe in love overcoming tragedy. The revelation of this additional layer of deception seemed to break something in Michael. His shoulders slumped as the full weight of his naivety crashed down upon him. How could I have been so blind? He whispered. It was Ethan who answered, his young voice remarkably steady. She was really good at pretending, Dad. She pretended with everyone. He looked up at Detective Martinez. She even fooled my grandparents, and Grandpa says he can spot a phony from a mile away. The detective nodded respectfully to the boy. Con artists like Mez Blackwood are professionals, Ethan. They've perfected their craft through multiple operations. They know exactly what to say, how to behave, what emotional strings to pull. Your father isn't the first intelligent person to be deceived, and unfortunately, without interventions like yours, he wouldn't have been the last. Rebecca stood surrounded by officers now, her wrists being secured in handcuffs. Gone was any pretense of the warm, loving bride. In her place stood a cold-eyed stranger, assessing the situation with clinical detachment. This is all very dramatic, she said flatly, but you have nothing but circumstantial evidence and the word of a child with an overactive imagination. Detective Martinez smiled slightly. Actually, we have quite a lot more than that. We have financial records from your previous operations. We have testimony from your former victims. We have your digital trail connecting all your aliases. She held up Rebecca's phone. And now, thanks to Ethan, we have direct evidence of your conspiracy with Marcus Delgado, who, by the way, we arrested this morning at the airport. He was very cooperative once we explained the potential sentencing guidelines. The color drained from Rebecca's face at the mention of her accomplice's arrest. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across her features. Marcus Delgado, Michael asked. Who is that? Her real husband, Detective Martinez explained. They'd been working together for years. He handles the offshore accounts and provides technical support while she runs the front-end operation. This final betrayal seemed almost too much to process. Michael stared at the diamond ring on Rebecca's finger, the ring he had spent months saving for, the ring he had thought symbolized their future together. It had all been a lie, from the very first tear-filled meeting to this moment. As the officers prepared to escort Rebecca from the church, she fixed Ethan with a final venomous glare. I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for that meddling kid, she spat, echoing the words of countless thwarted villains. Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he stood a little straighter beside his father. My mom taught me to tell the truth, he said simply, even when it's hard. In that moment, as Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, as the shocked wedding guests began to murmur and move about, as his family gathered protectively around him, Michael felt an overwhelming surge of pride for his son. Amid the wreckage of his shattered relationship and wounded pride, Ethan's courage shone like a beacon. Detective Martinez turned to Michael once Rebecca had been removed from the church. Mr. Bennett, we'll need formal statements from both you and Ethan. There will be an investigation into your accounts and assets to ensure nothing was compromised before today. Michael nodded numbly, still processing the shocking turn of events. Of course, whatever you need. For what it's worth, the detective added more gently, your son displayed remarkable courage and awareness. Many children in similar situations either don't notice the warning signs or are too intimidated to speak up. Michael looked down at Ethan, who was now leaning tiredly against his side. The boy looked exhausted but relieved. I think we both have a lot to learn from him, Michael said, running a hand over his son's hair. About trust, about honesty, and about recognizing the truth even when it's hidden behind a beautiful lie. As the church slowly emptied, as the flowers that had been meant to celebrate love now witnessed its counterfeit, father and son remained together at the altar, not in the ceremony that had been planned, but in a different kind of union, one forged in truth, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by a child's unwavering sense of right and wrong. The church emptied slowly, like water draining from a bathtub. The wedding guests filed out in hushed clusters, whispering among themselves, occasionally glancing back at Michael, who remained seated in the front pew, his head in his hands. The wedding planner frantically made calls in the corner, canceling the reception venue. The caterers, the musicians, all the carefully orchestrated elements of a celebration that would never happen. The flowers, arrangements of white lilies, and blue hydrangeas that Rebecca had insisted upon, now seemed to wilt under the weight of the day's revelations, their sweet scent turning cloying in the aftermath of betrayal. Ethan sat quietly beside his father, his small hand resting on Michael's arm. The boy's formal suit jacket had been removed, his bow tie loosened, but he maintained a solemn vigilance over his father that belied his 8 years. He didn't fidget or complain about the uncomfortable dress shoes pinching his feet or ask when they could leave. He simply stayed, a silent pillar of support in a world that had just been turned upside down. Michael's parents approached cautiously, their faces lined with concern and a hint of guilt. They had been the ones to encourage Michael to move on after Sarah's death, to find happiness again. They had embraced Rebecca as the answer to their prayers for their son and grandson. Now the weight of their unwitting role in bringing this predator into their family's life hung heavily upon their aged shoulders. "Michael," his mother said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "James is taking care of the guests. He's explaining, as much as can be explained. Detective Martinez would like us to come to the station when you're ready." She hesitated, clearly struggling to find words adequate to the situation. "We're so sorry, son." Michael looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. The initial shock had given way to a hollow numbness that seemed to extend from his chest outward. "It's not your fault, Mom," he said, his voice rough. "She fooled everyone." He looked down at Ethan. Almost everyone. His father, a retired judge who had prided himself on being an excellent reader of character, looked utterly deflated. "I should have seen it," he said, shaking his head. "Something about her story never quite added up, but I dismissed my concerns because you seemed so happy." "That was her specialty," Michael replied, standing up slowly, as if his body had aged a decade in the past hour. "Making people see what they wanted to see." He placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder, drawing strength from his son's presence. "Let's get this over with. The sooner we give our statements, the sooner we can try to put this behind us." The police station was a stark contrast to the church they had left behind. Instead of polished wood pews and stained glass, they sat on hard plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that revealed every line of exhaustion on their faces. Ethan had fallen asleep on a bench in the waiting area, his grandfather's suit jacket draped over him like a blanket, while Michael sat across from Detective Martinez in a small interview room. "I feel like such a fool," Michael admitted after recounting the full history of his relationship with Rebecca. "Looking back, there were so many red flags. She always had a reason why I couldn't meet her family. She had explanations for why her past was so hard to trace online. She always steered conversations away from specific details about her childhood or previous relationships." Detective Martinez nodded sympathetically. "Don't be too hard on yourself, Mr. Bennett. Rebecca Blackwood is what we call a high-functioning sociopath. She lacks empathy, but has learned to mimic it perfectly. She studies people's emotional needs and vulnerabilities the way an actor studies a role. Every gesture, every tearful story, every seemingly spontaneous moment of connection was calculated to draw you in." She slid a folder across the table containing photographs of 3 men. "These are her previous victims, all intelligent, successful professionals, all devoted fathers, all completely devastated by what she did to them." Michael studied the photographs, seeing reflections of his own pain in each man's eyes. "How did they recover from this?" he asked quietly. "With time. With support from their families. With therapy," the detective answered honestly. "The financial losses were significant, but the emotional damage, the loss of trust, the questioning of their own judgment, that took longer to heal." She paused, then added, "But they did heal, Mr. Bennett, and you will too." The detective explained that Rebecca and her accomplice Marcus would likely face federal charges across multiple jurisdictions. Their operation had been sophisticated, involving identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. With the evidence recovered from Rebecca's phone and the testimony from previous victims, they were looking at substantial prison sentences. "What about our safety?" Michael asked, thinking of Ethan. "When she was being arrested, the way she looked at my son." He couldn't finish the thought. "We take threats against witnesses very seriously, especially children," Detective Martinez assured him. "But I believe the risk is minimal. Rebecca and Marcus are calculated criminals. Their operation depends on stealth and deception, not violence. Still, we'll have a patrol car drive by your house regularly for the next few weeks, and I'd suggest changing your locks and security codes." When they finally left the police station, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo. They had given their statements, signed forms, and been assured that the investigation would continue without requiring much more from them in the immediate future. Michael's parents had taken Ethan home hours earlier, leaving James to drive his brother back when the interviews were complete. "You want to talk about it?" James asked as they pulled away from the curb. Michael stared out the window at the passing streetlights. "Not really," he answered. Then, after a moment's pause, "Actually, yes. How did I miss this, James? How did I bring someone like that into our lives, into Ethan's life?" James considered this carefully before responding. "Because you're a good man who believes in second chances. Because after Sarah died, you were lonely and vulnerable. And Rebecca knew exactly how to exploit that." He glanced at his brother. "And because she was damn good at her job. Michael, don't forget that part. This wasn't some amateur con. This was her career." When they arrived at Michael's house, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow into the gathering darkness. Inside, they found Michael's mother in the kitchen making comfort food. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, a childhood favorite that suddenly seemed exactly right. Ethan was already in his pajamas, sitting at the kitchen island, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his small shoulders. "Dad," he called when Michael entered, sliding off his stool and running to his father. Michael knelt down and gathered his son into a tight embrace, closing his eyes as he held him. How close they had come to disaster. How easily their lives could have been shattered beyond repair. "You were so brave today, buddy," Michael whispered into his son's ear. "I am so proud of you." "Are you mad at me for ruining your wedding?" Ethan asked, his voice small against Michael's shoulder. Michael pulled back to look his son in the eyes. "Ethan, you didn't ruin anything. You saved us. You saw the truth when none of the adults could see it." He brushed a hand over his son's curly hair. "I'm sorry I didn't listen when you tried to tell me something was wrong." "She was really good at pretending," Ethan said, echoing the detective's words from earlier. "And she made you happy. Before, I mean." The simple observation hit Michael with unexpected force. Rebecca had made him happy, or at least he had believed himself to be happy. The laughter, the sense of partnership, the feeling that life was moving forward again after years of grief. Had it all been an illusion? Or had there been moments of genuine connection amid the calculated deception? Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, and his parents had finally been persuaded to go home with promises to return in the morning, Michael sat alone in his living room. The house that had been filled with wedding preparations just hours ago now felt strangely empty, as if Rebecca's presence had been physically scrubbed from the walls. He found himself staring at photographs on the mantel, pictures of his life with Sarah, of Ethan as a baby, of family holidays and milestone moments. Among them stood a framed photograph of himself and Rebecca, taken during a weekend trip to the coast. Their faces were bright with laughter, the wind hustling their hair, the ocean stretching endlessly behind them. With trembling hands, Michael removed the photograph from its frame. He studied Rebecca's face, searching for some sign of her true nature, some hint of the coldness that had flashed in her eyes at the church. But there was nothing, just the warm smile he had fallen in love with, the smile that had made him believe in second chances. With a deep breath, He tore the photograph in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces until Rebecca's image was reduced to confetti in his hands. He gathered the fragments and dropped them into the wastebasket beside his desk. It felt like a ritual, a necessary step in excising her from his life. There would be practical matters to attend to in the coming days. Canceling joint accounts, returning wedding gifts, explaining the situation to colleagues and friends who hadn't been at the ceremony. The thought of it all was exhausting, but Michael found himself surprisingly calm. The worst had happened, and yet here they were, he and Ethan, still standing, still together. As he checked on his son one more time before heading to bed, Michael paused in the doorway of Ethan's room. The boy slept peacefully, his favorite stuffed bear clutched tightly under one arm. On his bedside table sat a photograph of Sarah, his late wife, and Ethan's mother. It had gone missing months ago, and Michael had assumed it was lost during cleaning or rearranging. Now he understood that Rebecca had removed it deliberately, part of her systematic effort to erase Sarah's memory from their home. Detective Martinez had returned it that afternoon, explaining that they had found it among Rebecca's possessions. She takes trophies, the detective had explained. Items that represent the past connections she's trying to sever. It's part of the isolation process. But Rebecca had failed. Sarah's memory remained alive in their hearts, just as their bond as father and son had remained unbroken despite Rebecca's attempts to drive them apart. Standing there in the soft glow of Ethan's nightlight, Michael felt a surge of gratitude so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they were safe. The truth, painful as it was, had set them free. And it had been his 8-year-old son, with his unwavering sense of right and wrong, who had led them back to solid ground. The weeks following the wedding that wasn't unfolded in a blur of legal meetings, therapy appointments, and quiet evenings at home, as Michael and Ethan slowly rebuilt their sense of security. The first few days had been the hardest, explaining to extended family members who hadn't attended the ceremony, returning gifts with carefully worded notes, fielding concerned phone calls from friends who had heard rumors, but not the full story. Michael had taken a temporary leave from his architectural firm, needing time to process everything that had happened and to be there for Ethan, whose school had been wonderfully understanding about his intermittent attendance. Detective Martinez had become a regular presence in their lives, stopping by with updates on the case and sometimes just to check on them. She had brought Ethan a junior detective badge, which he proudly wore pinned to his t-shirt for 3 days straight. Through her, they learned that Rebecca's real name was actually Natasha Petrovna, a Russian immigrant who had come to the United States as a teenager and had been running cons of various sorts since her early 20s. Marcus Delgado, her husband and accomplice, had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing authorities with details of all their previous operations and the offshore accounts where they had hidden their ill-gotten gains. "We've frozen all their assets," Detective Martinez explained one evening as she sat at their kitchen table, sharing the pizza Michael had ordered. "The DA is working on a restitution plan for all the victims, though it may take some time before any funds are recovered and distributed." Michael nodded, hardly caring about the financial aspects. The jewelry he had bought for Rebecca, the engagement ring, the wedding band, the anniversary earrings, had all been recovered from her hotel room and returned to him. He had promptly sold them, donating the proceeds to a support group for widowed parents, finding a certain poetry in transforming symbols of deception into resources for genuine healing. "How is the case looking?" he asked, more concerned about ensuring that Rebecca, or Natasha, would not be able to target another family. "Rock solid," the detective assured him. "With Marcus's testimony and the evidence from her phone, she's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Her attorney has made some noise about a plea deal, but the prosecutor isn't budging. Too many victims, too many years of fraud." Ethan, who had been quietly listening while drawing at the other end of the table, looked up. "Will I have to talk to the judge?" he asked, his voice small but steady. The resilience of children was remarkable, Michael thought, not for the first time. Detective Martinez shook her head. Not in person, no. The statement you gave us is more than enough. And we have all the evidence from the phone. You did your part, Ethan. The rest is up to us grown-ups. The investigation had revealed that Rebecca had begun targeting Michael almost immediately after his speech at the cancer research fundraiser. She had researched his late wife's illness, studied photographs to emulate Sarah's style without being too obvious about it, and carefully mapped his social and professional networks before engineering their chance meeting. The level of calculation was chilling, but in a strange way, it also brought Michael a measure of peace. It hadn't been his poor judgment or desperate loneliness that had made him vulnerable. He had been meticulously selected and expertly manipulated by a professional predator. 1 month after the aborted wedding, Michael and Ethan sat on the porch swing of their home, watching a summer storm roll in. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, the sky deepening to purple-gray as thunder rumbled in the distance. They had developed a new evening ritual, these quiet moments together before Ethan's bedtime, sometimes talking about their days, sometimes just sitting in companionable silence. "Dad?" Ethan asked, idly tracing patterns on the condensation of his lemonade glass. "Do you still miss her sometimes?" Michael hesitated, unsure which her his son was referring to. "Do you mean Rebecca?" he asked carefully. Ethan shook his head. "No. Mom. Do you still miss Mom?" The question caught Michael by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In the aftermath of Rebecca's deception, they had begun talking more openly about Sarah, bringing her memory back into their daily conversations in a way that felt healthy rather than haunted by grief. "Every day," Michael answered honestly. "Not always in a sad way anymore, but yes, I miss her every day." Ethan nodded, processing this. "Me too. I was afraid." He began, then stopped, struggling to articulate a complex emotion. "Afraid of what, buddy?" Michael prompted gently. "Afraid that if I told you about Rebecca being bad, you'd be alone again and sad like before. And that would be my fault." The admission tumbled out in a rush of words, Ethan's eyes fixed on his glass rather than meeting his father's gaze. Michael felt his heart constrict with a mixture of love and sorrow. He pulled his son closer, arm around his narrow shoulders. "Ethan, listen to me. What you did was incredibly brave. Being alone is much, much better than being with someone who lies and hurts people. You didn't cause any sadness. You protected us both." "But you liked being with her," Ethan persisted. "Before, I mean. You smiled more." The observation was innocent, but piercing in its accuracy. Michael had smiled more during his relationship with Rebecca. He had felt lighter, more present, less consumed by grief. Of course, it had all been built on an elaborate foundation of lies, but the emotions themselves had been real, at least on his side. "I did," Michael acknowledged. "And someday I hope to find that kind of happiness again, the real kind, with someone who truly cares about both of us. But I need you to understand something very important." He turned to face his son directly. "I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than be with someone who isn't good to you. You will always, always come first, Ethan. No matter what." The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering on the porch roof above them. Neither made a move to go inside as the shower intensified, the sound creating a cozy curtain of white noise around their conversation. "Dad," Ethan said after a thoughtful pause, "remember when you taught me to swim, and you said I had to trust you to catch me before I could jump in the deep end?" Michael smiled at the memory. "I remember. I think maybe it's like that with people too," Ethan continued, his young face serious. "You have to trust them, but you also have to watch if they're really there to catch you. Rebecca wasn't there to catch us. She just pretended to be." The simple wisdom of his son's analogy left Michael momentarily speechless. He marveled, not for the first time, at how children could sometimes cut straight to the heart of complex emotional truths with disarming clarity. "That's exactly right," he finally said. "And you know what? I think from now on, we'll be better at seeing who's really there to catch us. They sat together as the rain intensified, watching lightning illuminate the darkening sky. Neither was in a hurry to move inside, finding comfort in the transitional space of the porch, not quite in the storm, but not completely sheltered from it either. It felt appropriate for this stage of their healing journey. The following weekend, Michael's brother James suggested they all go fishing at the lake where they had spent summers as children. It would be good to get out of the house, he insisted, to do something normal and enjoyable that had nothing to do with Rebecca or the ongoing legal proceedings. Michael had been hesitant at first, but Ethan's enthusiasm had convinced him. The lake was exactly as Michael remembered it, the water clear and cool, the surrounding pines creating patches of dappled shade along the shore. They set up their fishing gear on the small wooden dock, the same spot where Michael and James had learned to fish from their father decades earlier. Ethan, despite having been fishing only a handful of times, displayed a natural patience that impressed both his father and uncle. "You're a natural, kiddo," James commented as Ethan carefully baited his hook without assistance. "Your dad was nowhere near this good at your age. He was always splashing around, scaring away all the fish." Michael laughed, not bothering to deny the characterization. "Your uncle is just jealous because I always caught more fish than he did, even with all my splashing." The good-natured bickering continued as they cast their lines into the water. The familiar rhythm of the activity, the gentle flick of the wrist, the soft plop of the bait hitting the water, the peaceful waiting, worked a subtle magic on Michael's tense shoulders and perpetually furrowed brow. He found himself relaxing genuinely for the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in his chest loosening incrementally with each breath of pine-scented air. Midway through the afternoon, as they sat enjoying sandwiches and sodas, James mentioned that he had run into Claire Parker at the grocery store, Ethan's third-grade teacher who had sent a thoughtful card after hearing about the wedding incident. "She asked about you both," James said casually, too casually. Seemed really concerned. Michael shot his brother a warning look. "Don't start, James." "Start what?" James replied with exaggerated innocence. "I'm just conveying a message from a concerned teacher. A very pretty, single, concerned teacher who specifically asked if you were doing okay." Ethan looked up with interest. "Mrs. Parker is really nice," he offered. "She gives us extra recess when we do good on our spelling tests. And she never yells, even when Tommy Marshall put his pet frog in her desk drawer." Michael couldn't help but smile at this ringing endorsement. "That's certainly a point in her favor," he admitted. "But it's way too soon to be thinking about anything like that." "Who said anything about anything like that?" James countered. "I'm talking about a perfectly innocent parent-teacher conversation over coffee. You know, normal human interaction with someone who isn't related to you or investigating a crime." Later, as they were packing up their gear to head home, Ethan proudly carrying the string of 3 small fish he had caught, 2 more than either his father or uncle, James pulled Michael aside. "I know it's soon," he said quietly, serious now, "but don't let what happened with Rebecca keep you barricaded behind walls forever. Not everyone is out to con you." Michael sighed, watching Ethan carefully placing his fish in the cooler. "I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But right now, the thought of trusting anyone outside of family just seems exhausting." "That's fair," James conceded. "Just don't make it permanent. Sarah wouldn't want that for you or for Ethan." The mention of Sarah's name no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Instead, Michael felt a gentle warmth at the thought of his late wife. "No, she wouldn't," he agreed. "She'd probably be lecturing me about resilience and taking chances right about now." "Exactly," James said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "Though she'd be a hell of a lot more eloquent about it than I am." That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Michael found himself drawn to the small home office where he had once spent hours working on architectural designs. He hadn't entered the room since discovering that Rebecca had been systematically photographing his financial documents stored there. Detective Martinez had suggested rearranging furniture or repainting after traumatic events, small changes to reclaim spaces associated with bad memories. Taking her advice, Michael had spent the past week gradually transforming the space. He had painted the formerly beige walls a deep warm blue, replaced the utilitarian desk with a handcrafted wooden one he'd found at a local artisan's shop, and rearranged the bookshelves to create a more open feeling. Now, sitting in the new leather chair beside the window, he felt ready to fully reclaim this part of his home. From the drawer of his new desk, he withdrew a leather-bound journal, a gift from Sarah on their last anniversary together. He had never used it, unable to face the blank pages after her death. Now, he opened it carefully, running his fingers over the cream-colored paper. He uncapped his pen and began to write, not a letter to Sarah as he might once have done, but a letter to himself and to Ethan, a vision for their future, a promise of healing, a commitment to moving forward while honoring the past. "We begin again," he wrote, the words flowing more easily than he had expected, not from scratch, but from experience, not in fear, but in hope, not alone, but together. As the summer progressed, their days fell into new patterns. Ethan returned to school full-time, thriving in the familiar routine and the company of his friends. Michael gradually resumed his work at the architectural firm, finding comfort in the precision and creativity his profession demanded. They started seeing a family therapist together once a week, learning tools to process their experience and strengthen their communication. Small milestones became causes for quiet celebration. The day Ethan didn't mention Rebecca at all. The morning Michael woke up without immediately remembering the humiliation of the aborted wedding. The afternoon they cleaned out the guest room closet where Rebecca had stored some of her things, donating the forgotten items to charity without ceremony or anguish. Life would never be exactly the same as before Rebecca had entered it, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a bad thing. They had both learned valuable lessons about trust, about listening to instincts, about the importance of honest communication. And most importantly, they had discovered their own resilience, the capacity to face betrayal and deception, but still remain open to the possibility of joy. One evening in late summer, as they walked home from the neighborhood ice cream shop, Ethan reached for his father's hand, something he had claimed to be too old for in recent months. The simple gesture, spontaneous and trusting, felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said, swinging their joined hands slightly as they walked. "I was thinking maybe we could invite Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle James over for a cookout this weekend. And maybe," he hesitated, then pushed forward, "maybe Mrs. Parker too. She mentioned that she likes hamburgers when we were talking about favorite foods in class." Michael glanced down at his son, surprised by the suggestion. "Are you playing matchmaker, buddy?" Ethan shrugged, trying and failing to look innocent. "No, maybe. I just think she's nice, and you need more friends. Plus, she laughs at your dad jokes, which Grandma says is very rare." Michael couldn't help but laugh at his son's transparent attempt at subtlety. "We'll see," he said, not committing but not refusing either. "One step at a time, remember." They continued their walk home as the summer evening settled around them, fireflies beginning to emerge in the gathering dusk. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. They had weathered a storm together and emerged stronger, more united than before. Whatever came next, whether it included Mrs. Parker or not, they would face it as they had faced everything else, side by side, with honest hearts and open eyes. The path ahead might not be perfect or entirely smooth, but it was theirs to walk together. And for now, that was more than enough. Fall arrived with a painter's brushstroke, transforming the neighborhood into a canvas of crimson, amber, and burnished gold. The changing seasons seemed to reflect the transformation happening within the Bennett household, gradual, beautiful, and natural in its progression. 3 months had passed since the wedding that wasn't, and while the legal proceedings against Rebecca continued to unfold in the background of their lives, they no longer dominated every conversation or thought. The cookout that Ethan had suggested at the end of summer had indeed happened, though with considerably less matchmaking success than the boy had hoped. Mrs. Parker, Claire, had attended as one of several of Ethan's teachers invited, keeping the gathering friendly and pressure-free. Michael had appreciated her warm conversation and genuine interest in Ethan's well-being, but he had carefully maintained a respectful distance, not yet ready to navigate anything resembling romantic interest. Claire, perceptive and kind, had seemed to understand this without explanation, treating him with a gentle friendliness that demanded nothing in return. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, Michael stood at the kitchen counter making pancakes, a weekend tradition that had been revived with enthusiasm in recent weeks. He poured batter onto the griddle, watching as perfect circles formed and bubbles began to appear on their surfaces. From the living room came the sounds of Ethan's favorite cartoon, punctuated occasionally by his laughter, a sound that had become more frequent and unrestrained as the shadows of the past few months receded. "Pancakes in 5 minutes, buddy," Michael called, flipping the golden discs with practiced ease. Sarah had been the pancake expert in the family, but after her death, Michael had determinedly mastered the technique, wanting to preserve this small piece of normalcy for Ethan. What had begun as an act of parental duty had evolved into something he genuinely enjoyed. The simple alchemy of turning basic ingredients into something that brought his son joy. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his hair still rumpled from sleep despite having been up for hours. "Can I add the chocolate chips to mine?" he asked, already reaching for the bag in the pantry. This recent negotiation, chocolate chips allowed in weekend pancakes but not weekday ones, represented the kind of ordinary parenting decision that Michael now treasured for its very normalcy. 3 per pancake, Michael countered, not the mountain you tried to sneak on last week. Ethan grinned, not particularly disappointed by the limitation. "Deal." As they settled at the kitchen table with their breakfast, Michael noticed how Ethan's feet now reached the floor when he sat in his chair. Had that happened just recently, or had Michael simply been too preoccupied to notice? Children grew in sudden spurts and almost imperceptible increments. Blink, and they've changed in some small but significant way. "Dad," Ethan said, carefully cutting his pancake into precise triangles, "Tommy's having a sleepover birthday party next weekend. Can I go?" 6 months ago, the question would have been routine. 3 months ago, in the immediate aftermath of Rebecca's betrayal, the thought of Ethan staying overnight in someone else's home would have triggered Michael's newly heightened vigilance and protectiveness. Today, it sparked only a moment's hesitation before rationality prevailed. "Tommy Marshall, the one with the frog incident," Michael clarified, remembering the stories about Mrs. Parker's classroom. Ethan nodded, his mouth full of pancake. "Sure," Michael said, surprising himself with how easily the word came. "We'll need to get him a gift. Any ideas?" Relief and excitement flashed across Ethan's face. He had clearly expected more resistance. He really likes those science kits, the ones where you can grow crystals or make slime. They discussed birthday gift options as they finished breakfast, the conversation flowing easily into plans for the rest of the weekend. Yard work that needed attention, a new movie Ethan wanted to see, whether the Halloween decorations should come down from the attic next week or the following one. Ordinary planning, ordinary life. Extraordinary in its normalcy after the upheaval they had experienced. As Ethan cleared his plate to the sink, he paused, his expression growing serious. "Dad, is it okay if I ask about what happened to Rebecca now?" They had established this pattern in therapy. Ethan would signal when he wanted to discuss difficult topics rather than having them arise unexpectedly. It was one of many tools they had developed to help process their experience. "Of course," Michael said, gesturing for Ethan to sit back down. "What do you want to know?" Ethan settled into his chair, legs swinging slightly. "Detective Martinez came to our class yesterday for career day. She didn't mention us or anything," he hastened to add. "But it made me wonder if Rebecca is still in jail." Michael nodded, appreciating both the detective's discretion and his son's continued interest in accountability. "She is. Her trial is scheduled for next month, but Detective Martinez thinks she'll probably accept a plea deal before then." "What's a plea deal?" Ethan asked, his vocabulary expanding to include legal terminology no 8-year-old should need to understand. "It means she'll agree to plead guilty to some of the charges against her in exchange for a specific sentence, instead of risking a trial where she might get an even longer sentence if she's found guilty." Ethan considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. "So she's definitely going to be punished. She can't just say she's sorry and get out." "Definitely," Michael confirmed. "The evidence against her is very strong, especially with her partner, Marcus, testifying against her. She's going to be in prison for quite a few years." This seemed to satisfy Ethan, who nodded solemnly. "Good. Not because I want bad things for her exactly," he clarified, displaying the empathy that remained intact despite everything, "but because she needs to learn not to hurt people." The maturity of the response struck Michael anew. Their therapist had explained that trauma could sometimes accelerate certain aspects of emotional development in children, creating moments of wisdom that seemed beyond their years. These moments were bittersweet. Evidence of Ethan's resilience, but also reminders of innocence compromised. "That's exactly right," Michael agreed. "Actions have consequences, and facing those consequences is part of how people learn and change. Like when I broke Mrs. Wilson's window with my baseball and had to use my allowance to help pay for it," Ethan offered, drawing a parallel to his own experience. "Similar concept, much bigger scale," Michael confirmed with a small smile. "Any other questions about Rebecca?" Ethan shook his head, apparently satisfied with this update. "Nope. Can we put up the Halloween decorations today instead of next week? Tommy says his dad already put up their giant spider on the porch." The swift pivot back to normal childhood concerns was another gift of resilience. Michael found himself agreeing to the decoration expedition, and soon they were in the attic, sorting through boxes of plastic pumpkins, string lights, and the motion-activated skeleton that had terrified the mail carrier last year. Later that afternoon, as Michael stood on a ladder hanging fake cobwebs from the porch ceiling, his phone rang. He carefully descended and checked the caller ID. Detective Martinez. These calls had become less frequent as the case progressed, but they still triggered a momentary tightening in his chest. "Detective," he answered, walking a few steps away from where Ethan was arranging a family of fabric ghosts on the front steps. "Mr. Bennett," she replied, her tone professional but warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend." "Not at all. We're just getting a head start on Halloween." "Sounds fun," she said, then continued more seriously. "I wanted to let you know personally before you hear it elsewhere. Rebecca, Natasha, has accepted a plea deal. 15 years with no possibility of parole for at least 10, plus full restitution to all identified victims." Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Some part of him had been braced for disappointment, for the news that she had somehow manipulated the system just as she had manipulated him. "That's good," he said finally. "Thank you for letting me know." "There's something else," the detective continued. "As part of the agreement, she's provided information about other operations similar to hers. It seems there's an entire network of these romance scammers, some working independently like she was, others as part of organized groups. Her information is helping us build cases against at least a dozen other perpetrators." The revelation was simultaneously disturbing and validating. Disturbing to realize how widespread these predatory schemes were, validating to know that their painful experience might help prevent others from suffering the same fate. "Is there anything else we need to do?" Michael asked. "Any additional statements or testimony?" "No. You and Ethan have done everything necessary. This chapter, at least from a legal perspective, is closed." The detective paused, then added more personally, "How are you both doing?" Michael glanced over at Ethan, who was now instructing their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, on the proper arrangement of pumpkins for maximum spookiness. The sight warmed his heart. "We're doing well," he answered honestly. "Really well, actually. The therapy has helped. And Ethan he's amazing. Kids are so resilient." "I'm glad to hear it. Detective Martinez said with genuine warmth. The invitation to visit the precinct for that official junior detective tour still stands whenever Ethan wants to cash it in. After thanking her and ending the call, Michael rejoined Ethan and Mrs. Caldwell, who had apparently been recruited into their decoration committee. The news about Rebecca's plea deal hummed in the background of his consciousness, significant but no longer earth-shattering. It was important information, closure of a sort, but it wasn't the center of their lives anymore. That evening, after a day filled with Halloween preparations and a spontaneous backyard football game with some of Ethan's friends from down the street, Michael sat on the edge of his son's bed for their nightly chat. These conversations had evolved from the strictly enforced bedtime routine of earlier years into something more fluid and valuable, a protected space for questions, concerns, stories, or simply comfortable silence before sleep. "Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying the slightly dreamy quality that often preceded sleep. "Remember how you used to tell me that Mom is watching over us from heaven?" Michael nodded, his throat tightening slightly at the unexpected reference to Sarah. "Do you think she saw what happened with Rebecca? Do you think she was trying to warn us somehow?" The question held no fear or distress, just genuine childhood curiosity about the mysteries of the universe. Michael chose his words carefully, balancing his own spiritual beliefs with respect for the comfort such ideas brought his son. "I think your mom would have done anything to protect you, to protect us both," he said finally. "Whether that means sending us signs or just, I don't know, maybe helping you be brave enough to trust your instincts when something felt wrong." Ethan considered this, his eyes growing heavier. "I think maybe she helped me notice things, like how Rebecca never looked at the pictures of her on the mantel. She just pretended to. And how she always checked her phone right after you showed her something important." The observation startled Michael. He hadn't realized Ethan had been cataloging these subtle inconsistencies all along. "Those were really smart things to notice, buddy." "Mrs. Parker says being observant is a superpower," Ethan murmured, sleep beginning to claim him. "She says it helps us understand the world better." "Mrs. Parker is very wise," Michael agreed, leaning down to kiss his son's forehead. "Sleep tight, detective." In the quiet of the hallway outside Ethan's room, Michael paused, struck by the peaceful ordinariness of the moment. Their home felt like their own again, not haunted by Rebecca's betrayal or shadowed by fear, but simply lived in, comfortable, safe. The Halloween decorations glowed softly throughout the house. The kitchen still bore evidence of their homemade pizza dinner, and tomorrow stretched before them, with no plans more complicated than leaf raking and perhaps a bike ride if the weather held. Michael made his way to the living room and settled into his favorite chair, reaching for the latest architectural journal he'd been meaning to read. Before opening it, he found himself looking at the photograph of Sarah that had been returned to its rightful place on the mantel. Her smile, captured mid-laugh during a beach vacation years ago, remained as warm and genuine as ever. "We're okay," he said softly to the image. "We're going to be okay." The weeks that followed brought more small steps forward. Ethan's report card arrived with excellent marks and glowing comments from Mrs. Parker about his participation and helpfulness in class. Michael completed a major project at work that had been stalled during the worst of his distraction and received a commendation from the firm's partners. They adopted a dog, a gentle, middle-aged golden retriever from the local shelter who Ethan named Copper and who quickly established himself as an essential member of the family. Halloween came and went in a blur of candy and costumes, followed by Thanksgiving with the extended family. Throughout it all, Michael found himself increasingly present, increasingly grateful for the simple pleasures that made up a good life. Ethan's excited chatter about school projects, early morning walks with Copper through frost-covered grass, the satisfaction of solving a challenging design problem at work. One unseasonably warm December afternoon, Michael left work early to attend Ethan's holiday concert at school. He arrived with time to spare and found himself wandering the colorful hallways, admiring the student artwork and projects displayed on bulletin boards. Outside Mrs. Parker's classroom, He paused to examine a creative writing displayed, titled Heroes in Our Lives. His eyes were drawn immediately to Ethan's contribution, a carefully written paragraph accompanied by a somewhat abstract but recognizable drawing of what appeared to be two figures standing together. Heroes don't always have capes or superpowers, Ethan had written in his improving penmanship. Sometimes heroes are just people who do the right thing even when it's hard. My dad is my hero because he teaches me to be honest and brave. And I guess I was his hero too, when I helped him see the truth about someone who wasn't nice. Being a hero isn't about being perfect. It's about protecting people you love and standing up for what's right. Michael read the words twice, emotion welling in his throat. He was so absorbed in the display that he didn't notice Mrs. Parker's approach until she spoke. "He's quite the writer," she said warmly. "That piece got a special mention during our author's chair this week." Michael turned, smiling through the moisture that had gathered in his eyes. "He certainly has a way with words. I'm not sure I deserve the hero status, but I appreciate the sentiment." Claire Parker's expression was kind but direct. "Children are remarkably perceptive about who deserves their admiration, Mr. Bennett. I'd take the compliment if I were you." Over the past months, their interactions had remained cordial and primarily focused on Ethan's education, but Michael found himself suddenly noticing details he had previously overlooked. The intelligent warmth in her eyes, the way she spoke directly but gently, the simple elegance of the emerald sweater she wore. "Please, call me Michael," he said, surprising himself with the invitation. "After all, according to the bulletin board, I'm apparently sharing hero status with you. Ethan mentioned your lesson about observation being a superpower." A pleased smile crossed her face. "The children were learning about scientific observation methods, but I believe the skill applies far beyond science. Noticing details, paying attention to what others overlook, these can be life-changing abilities." "They certainly were in our case," Michael agreed, thinking of Ethan's careful attention to Rebecca's inconsistencies. An announcement over the school's PA system reminded parents that the holiday concert would begin in 15 minutes in the auditorium. "I should find my seat," Michael said. "But it was nice talking with you, Claire." "You as well," she replied. Then, with a hint of the directness he was coming to appreciate, she added, "The third grade is responsible for the refreshments after the concert. I could use an extra hand setting up if you're not rushing off." The invitation was casual, leaving plenty of room for polite refusal, but Michael found himself nodding. "I'd be happy to help." Later, as they arranged cookies on trays while children's voices raised in song drifted from the auditorium, Michael realized he was enjoying himself, not just tolerating a social interaction, but genuinely appreciating the company and conversation. Claire was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and listening attentively to his answers, sharing stories about her third-grade classroom that made him laugh, and displaying a genuine fondness for Ethan that warmed him from within. When Ethan found them after the performance, his face flushed with the excitement of having remembered all his lines in the musical number. He showed no surprise at seeing his teacher and father chatting comfortably. In fact, Michael caught a distinct look of satisfaction on his son's face, as if a particularly clever plan was unfolding exactly as intended. "The concert was amazing, buddy," Michael said, wrapping an arm around Ethan's shoulders. "You nailed that solo part." "Indeed he did," Claire agreed. "Best tree number 3 we've ever had in the third-grade chorus." Ethan beamed at the teasing compliment. "Dad, can Mrs. Parker come see our Christmas lights? We finished putting them up yesterday, and they look super cool, especially the new ones on the big tree in the front yard." The transparent matchmaking attempt might have been embarrassing in other circumstances, but something in the moment, perhaps the holiday spirit, perhaps the genuine progress they had made in healing, perhaps simply the warm smile Claire tried to hide, made Michael respond with equal directness. "That's an excellent idea," he said, meeting Claire's eyes. "If Mrs. Parker isn't busy this weekend, maybe she'd like to join us for hot chocolate and Christmas lights. Copper would love to meet her too." "Copper?" Claire asked. "Our dog," Ethan explained excitedly. "He's golden and super friendly, and he loves visitors." Claire's smile broadened. "Well, I can hardly refuse an invitation that includes Christmas lights, hot chocolate, and a golden retriever. That sounds lovely." As they finalized plans for Saturday evening, Michael felt something shift inside him. Not the dizzy infatuation he had experienced with Rebecca, but something quieter and more solid. A door opening, perhaps, or a window letting in fresh air. He wasn't naive enough to believe that one pleasant conversation guaranteed anything, but he was proud of his willingness to consider possibilities again. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Michael found himself drawn once more to the small leather journal he had begun writing in months earlier. He opened to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top, then paused, pen hovering over the blank space below. "Today I realized something," he finally wrote. "Healing isn't about forgetting the hurt or pretending it never happened. It's not about erasing the past or ignoring the lessons it taught us. Healing is about making room for new experiences alongside the memory of old ones. It's about learning to trust again, not blindly, but wisely. It's about recognizing that one person's betrayal doesn't define everyone's intentions." He continued writing, the words flowing more easily with each line. When he finally closed the journal, the clock showed it was nearly midnight, but he felt lightened, clear-headed. Whatever happened with Claire, whether friendship, something more, or simply a pleasant acquaintance, the fact that he could consider opening his heart again was victory enough for now. The path forward would not always be smooth. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, echoes of betrayal that might surface unexpectedly. But tonight, in the quiet of his home, with his son sleeping peacefully down the hall and their rescue dog curled at the foot of the couch, Michael Bennett felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. Hope, not just for survival, but for genuine happiness. Not just for getting through each day, but for embracing whatever joys and challenges each new day might bring. Outside, the first snow of December began to fall, covering the world in pristine white. Michael stood at the window watching the transformation, reminded that even the coldest seasons eventually give way to spring, and that beauty can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, especially when viewed through the clear, honest eyes of a child who knows the difference between what is true and what merely appears to be.